The Raven Creek gang thought they were raiding just another blacksmith shop in Redemption, Arizona. They didn't know that Thomas "Iron Hand" McCullough had killed 47 men in fair fights, each death marked with a notch on his legendary Colt. They didn't understand why old-timers still whispered about the gunslinger who could shoot a playing card in half at 30 paces. Now, as 6 armed bandits level their weapons at what they think is just another aging craftsman, they're about to learn why he was the most feared pistolero in the West. Some legends aren't written in history books. They're carved in gun smoke and blood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Arizona sky blood red as Thomas McCullough lit his forge. His calloused hands, scarred from both burning metal and gunfighters' calluses, worked the bellows with practiced precision. The fire roared to life, casting dancing shadows. Across the walls of his shop, where perfectly arranged tools hung like soldiers at attention. "Morning, Mr. McCullough," young Jimmy Porter called from the doorway, careful not to step inside without invitation. At 12, the boy had already learned the careful manners that kept a person alive in the territories. "Pa sent me for that." "The plow blade you've been fixing," Thomas nodded, his movements deliberate as he retrieved the mended implement. Every motion spoke of control, of a man who'd spent decades mastering the art of precise movement. "Tell your father it'll hold better than new," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of authority. "Folded the steel 7 times. Jimmy lingered, eyes drawn to the wooden box, mounted high on the shop's back wall. Through its glass front, the polished pearl grip of a Colt revolver caught the morning light. Thomas pretended not to notice the dim boy's gaze, as he did with all who spotted that particular piece of his past. Sheriff Mills arrived next, spurs jingling against the packed dirt floor. "Thompson's boy said the Raven Creek gang hit another homestead last night," he said without a preamble. 3 dead over in Sweet Valley. Thomas's hammer struck iron with measured force, each blow perfectly placed. "Getting bold," he observed, though his eyes never left his work. "Moving closer to town. Word is they're looking to set up permanent-like in the territory." Mills watched Thomas work, noting how the blacksmith's right hand never strayed far. From his side, even at the forge, old habits died hard. Might be good to have someone around who knows how to handle trouble. The hammer's rhythm didn't falter. "I'm just a blacksmith now, Sheriff. Been one for 10 peaceful years." "Peace has a price, Thomas. Sometimes it's paid in lead." A ghost of something dangerous flickered across McCullough's weathered face. "Everything has a price," he agreed, checking the edge of a blade he was crafting. "Question is whether the Raven Creek boys are willing to pay it." Throughout the morning, customers came and went. Thomas shaped metal with the same precision he'd once used to shape fate with a 6-gun. Rachel Turner, the schoolmarm, brought in a broken wagon wheel, her eyes lingering on his hands as he examined the damage. She'd heard the stories like everyone else, but found it hard to reconcile the quiet craftsman with tales of the legendary gunslinger who'd once cleared Tombstone of the Clayton gang single-handed. "Beautiful work," she said, watching him shape hot metal. "You have an artist's hands, Mr. McCullough." He offered a slight smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just a matter of control, ma'am, whether it's metal or anything else. Control makes the difference between creation and destruction." By midday, the heat from the forge had turned the shop into a furnace. Thomas worked stripped to the waist, revealing a map of scars across his torso. Bullet wounds and knife marks told stories of violent days long past. But it was the burn mark on his left forearm that drew the most attention. A perfect circle that matched the barrel of a Colt 45, a reminder of the day he'd learned to trust speed less than accuracy. The afternoon brought Doc Wilson, wanting. His surgical instruments sharpened. The old physician was one of the few who remembered Thomas from before, who dug bullets out of him during those wild years. "Saw fresh tracks heading toward town," the doctor mentioned casually. Lot of horses. Bad business coming, I expect. Thomas tested the edge of a scalpel against his thumb. Bad business usually finds its way here eventually, Doc. Nature of the territory. Nature of men, more like. Some can't leave well enough alone. Wilson gathered his freshly honed tools. Just remember, old friend, a man can change his ways, but the world don't always let him stay changed. As evening approached, Thomas banked his forge with the same methodical care he'd once used maintaining his guns. He checked his shop's heavy doors, tested the reinforced shutters he'd installed years ago. Some called it paranoia. He called it experience. In the fading light, he allowed himself a single practice draw with the worn Colt that hung behind his workbench. The motion was smooth as flowing water, the gun seeming to appear in his hand by magic. 10 years of peaceful work hadn't slowed him a heartbeat. Replacing the weapon, Thomas reminded himself that tomorrow would be another day of honest work, of shaping metal instead of destinies. But as he checked the loading on his backup piece, before heading home, he couldn't shake the feeling that destiny had other plans. The Arizona night settled over redemption like a funeral shroud, bringing with it the whispers of approaching violence. And in his shop, surrounded by the tools of creation and destruction, Thomas Iron Hand McCullough prepared for whatever the dawn might bring. Thomas sat alone in his shop after sunset, cleaning his tools with the same methodical precision he'd once used on his firearms. The letter that arrived that morning lay open on his workbench, its words burning in his mind. Iron Hand. There, coming. Some things don't stay buried. Marcus Wheeler had been his backup in the Santee shootout, back when Thomas earned his famous nickname. Now his old friend's warning stirred memories he'd fought hard to forget. The name Iron Hand McCullough hadn't been earned easily. It came after he'd taken a bullet through his right palm in Silver City, then still managed to draw and fire with deadly accuracy. The paper had called it a grip of iron, unwavering even in death's face. The name stuck, though few knew its true origin. He pulled out his old journal, its leather cover worn smooth by time. Inside, each entry marked a death, a justification, a piece of his soul traded for survival. 47 names, 47 moments when his speed and accuracy had meant the difference between living and dying. The first name, Jake Quickdraw Matthews, 1863. A fair fight over a false accusation. Thomas had been barely 20, still learning that being right didn't matter as much as being fast. Matthews had drawn first, but Thomas had shot straighter. The last entry dated 10 years ago, William Black Bill Turner. The shootout that had finally convinced Thomas to hang up his guns. 7 men dead in less than 30 seconds. And for what? A bounty that had never been collected, a reputation that had grown beyond control. A noise outside pulled his attention. Just a stray dog, but his hand had moved to his hip before conscious thought. Some instincts never died. Sarah Miller from the general store found him there the next morning, still at his workbench. She needed hinges fixed, she said, but her eyes kept drifting to the scars on his hands. "My pa told me stories about you," she said finally. "Said he saw you take down the entire Carson gang at Crystal Creek. Said you moved like lightning and shot straight as God's judgment." Thomas kept working. "Your pa saw what everyone saw back then. A man doing what needed. Doing, nothing more. He said you could have been rich, could have kept collecting bounties. Instead, you disappeared. Why choose this life?" He tested the hinges movement before answering. "Making things is better than destroying them, Miss Miller. Took me too long to learn that." But even as he spoke, his mind tracked riders approaching. From the south, 3 men moving slow, watching his shop. Raven Creek scouts, most likely. They'd been getting bolder, sending men to observe potential targets. By midday, word spread through town about 2 more homesteads hit. The gang was systematic, working their way closer to redemption. Sheriff Mills posted extra deputies, but Everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. That afternoon, Thomas found young Jimmy Porter practicing quick draws behind the shop. The boy froze, expecting anger, but Thomas just watched silently. "I want to be ready," Jimmy said finally. "When they come, like you were." "Being ready isn't about being fast," Thomas replied, remembering his own lessons learned in blood. "It's about being right, every time, because you only have to be wrong once." He spent the evening maintaining his forge, but his thoughts were on the gun hidden beneath his workbench, a custom Colt, balanced perfect as a dancing partner. 10 years of peace hadn't changed the weight of it in his hand. Night brought more riders past his shop. Different ones this time, moving with the practiced grace of men who lived by violence. Thomas recognized the type. Professionals, not common bandits. The Raven Creek gang was bringing in serious talent. In the dark, he finally opened the chest. He'd kept locked for a decade. Inside lay the tools of his former trade: gun belt, spare cylinders, cleaning kit. And beneath them all, a tin star he'd earned and surrendered, back when he'd thought justice could be served by law alone. The metal felt cold against his fingers, like the touch of a dead friend. Each item carried memories. The gun belt, worn, smooth where his hand had rested thousands of times. The extra cylinders, loaded with careful deliberation before each job. The cleaning kit, used so often it had become a form of meditation. Somewhere in the night, a lone wolf howled. Thomas remembered another night, another time when violence had come calling. He'd walked away then, believing peace could be bought with silence and distance. But as he oiled the gun belt's leather, working it back to supple strength, he knew some prices had to be paid more than once. The territory was changing, and with it the cost of peace was rising. The question wasn't whether violence would come to redemption. The question was whether Thomas "Iron Hand" McCullough would meet it wearing the mantle of legend, or if he'd die a simple blacksmith trying to deny the thunder in his blood. The Raven Creek gang announced their arrival in redemption with fire. Old Man Henderson's ranch went up in flames just before dawn, the blaze visible from Thomas's shop window. Not a random act, a message written in flame and fear. Sheriff. Mills arrived as Thomas was opening his forge. 12 men hit the ranch, he reported grimly. Professional work. Henderson's hands never had a chance to reach their guns. Thomas continued his morning routine, but his movements held an edge of tension. The old man, missing, along with his strongbox and that new rifle shipment he was holding for the army. Mills watched Thomas's face. They knew exactly what they were after. Word spread through town like wildfire. The Raven Creek gang wasn't just another band of outlaws. They were organized, disciplined, led by men who understood territory and tactics. They'd been moving north systematically, establishing control through a combination of violence and calculated mercy. By midday, more details emerged. Riders brought news of similar attacks across 3 counties, each target carefully chosen, each raid executed with military precision. The gang's leader, a man known only as the Colonel, had once served in the Union Army. He brought that same strategic thinking to outlawry. Thomas listened to the rumors while he worked, cataloging details others missed. The gang's pattern suggested at least 30 men, split into well-coordinated teams. They struck from multiple directions, used proper flanking maneuvers. This wasn't random violence. It was a campaign. Rachel Turner rushed into his shop just after noon, her usual composure shattered. "They're closing the school," she announced. "After what happened to the Henderson place. The parents are too frightened to send their children." He paused in his work, studying the fear in her eyes. "Wise decision," he said quietly. "When men like this move in, innocents need protection first." The sheriff's calling for volunteers, forming a town militia. She hesitated. "People are asking about you, Thomas, about the stories." He turned back to his forge. "Stories are just stories, Miss Turner. Not these ones, not about you. More visitors came throughout the afternoon, Doc Wilson reporting that 3 of Henderson's hands had survived, badly wounded. Their descriptions of the raid painted a chilling picture. The gang moved like soldiers, communicated with hand signals, struck with coordinated precision. Jimmy Porter slipped in near closing time, his young face serious. "Pa says the colonel's offering deals to some folks," he reported. "Protection. Money. Says those who pay won't get troubled." Thomas nodded slowly. Another piece of the pattern, not just raiders, empire builders. The colonel was establishing a power base, using fear and pragmatism to secure his position. As evening approached, Sarah Miller returned with news from her father's store. "Supply wagons aren't coming anymore," she said. "Drivers are too scared. The gang's controlling all the routes now." Through it all, Thomas worked his forge, but his projects had changed. The plough blades and wagon wheels gave way to smaller items, reinforced door hinges, strong locks, things a town might need in troubled times. Night brought more fires on the horizon, 3 this time spreading west. The gang was encircling Redemption, cutting off routes, isolating their target. Professional work, like Mills had said. In his darkened shop, Thomas finally unlocked a hidden compartment beneath his workbench. Inside lay something he'd hoped never to need again, detailed maps of the territory, marked with patrol routes and defensive positions. Old habits from his manhunting days. He spent hours studying the gang's movement patterns, seeing what others missed. The colonel was good, better than most criminals, but he'd made one critical mistake. He'd assumed Redemption was just another weak town, ripe for conquest. The colonel didn't know about Thomas's past, didn't understand that some quiet men stayed quiet not from weakness, but from hard-learned wisdom. Most importantly, he didn't realize that his systematic campaign was giving Thomas time to prepare. A wolf howled again that night, closer now. Thomas cleaned his guns with practiced care, counting ammunition, checking sightlines. Tomorrow would bring violence. He could feel it in his bones, in the way the air felt heavy with approaching thunder. The colonel was coming, bringing his army of killers to claim another territory. But this time, he'd find more than just frightened townspeople and overwhelmed lawmen. He'd find Iron Hand McCullough, the legend he'd never heard of, the ghost of justice that still haunted the dreams of outlaws across 3 territories. And legends, once awakened, had a way of reminding men why they became legends in the first place. They came at noon, when the sun hung highest, and the forge's heat made the air shimmer like a dream. 6 riders, moving with military precision, their horses' hooves muffled by wrapped cloth. Professional work. Thomas noticed these details without, seeming to look up from his anvil, his hammer's rhythm never breaking. "Shut it down, old man," their leader called out, a tall man with captain's bars still pinned to his dust-covered coat. "Colonel wants to talk business." Thomas set his hammer. "Down carefully, movements unhurried." "Shop's open to paying customers," he replied, voice quiet but carrying. "Otherwise, I'm busy." The captain's laugh held no humor. "Ain't asking." His men spread out, taking positions with practiced ease. 2 by the door, 2 covering the windows, 1 watching the back. Colonels offering protection to valuable businesses. Blacksmith shops vital to the territory. Be a shame if something happened to it. Thomas wiped his hands slowly on his leather apron. "Would be," he agreed. Young Jimmy Porter, watching wide-eyed from across the street, saw how the blacksmith's right hand never quite moved away from his side. "Smart man like you," the captain continued, "knows how things work. Regular payments, you stay in business. Resist." He gestured at the smoke still rising from Henderson's ranch. "Protection's expensive these days," Thomas observed, moving casually toward his workbench. The men tensed, but he just reached for a cloth to wipe his face. "Cheaper than replacing everything you own." The captain's hand rested on his gun. "Or burying your friends?" Thomas's eyes met his. Something in that gaze made the captain's next words die in his throat. "Last man who threatened my friends." Thomas said softly, is buried out past Crystal Creek, along with the 11 others who rode with him. The atmosphere in the shop changed instantly. The captain's men shifted, hands moving closer to weapons. They felt it too, the sudden sense that something was very wrong. You threatening me, old man? The captain's voice cracked slightly. No. Thomas hadn't moved, but somehow he seemed different, harder, dangerous. Giving you a chance. More than the Carson gang got. Recognition flickered in the captain's eyes. Stories heard around campfires, legends whispered in saloons. Iron Hand McCullough, the ghost that haunted outlaws' nightmares. The captain's revolver cleared leather fast, blindingly fast. But Thomas's gun seemed to materialize in his hand. As if by magic, the explosion of gunfire was deafening in the confined space. The captain stared in disbelief at his shattered weapon, its barrel split perfectly down the middle by a single shot. His men stood frozen, caught between training and a terror. Next one goes where I want it to, Thomas said quietly. Your choice where that is. Kill him. The captain screamed, scrambling backward. 5 guns raised, 5 shots rang out, 5 guns clattered to the floor, each with its barrel expertly split. Thomas hadn't seemed to move. Just 6 shots, faster than seemed humanly possible. 6 ruined weapons, 6 men standing unharmed but shaking. Message for your colonel, Thomas said, his voice carrying the weight of thunder. Redemption's not for sale, neither am I. Tell him Iron Hand McCullough sends his regards. They ran. Professional soldiers, hardened killers, they ran like spooked children. Their horses' hooves kicked up dust as they fled, no longer caring about stealth. In the sudden silence, Thomas carefully holstered his smoking Colt. The watching crowd that had gathered outside his shop stood speechless. Sheriff Mills pushed through them, staring at the ruined guns scattered across the floor. Lord Almighty, Thomas, he whispered. Splitting gun barrels? Didn't think that was even possible. Wasn't trying to kill them, Thomas replied, turning back to his forge. Just sending a message. But they all heard what he didn't say. Next time would be different. Next time, the legend of Iron Hand McCullough wouldn't end with just broken steel. The news spread like wildfire across the territory. The colonel's best men humiliated. 6 guns split with 6 shots. The ghost of justice was back, and hell was. Riding with him, in his shop, Thomas stared at his right hand, at the scars that had earned him his name. 10 years of peace ended in 6 seconds. The iron was hot now, and destiny was waiting to be shaped. The time for hiding was over. Iron Hand. McCullough was back, and redemption would never be the same. By sunset, 3 different versions of the shooting circulated through Redemption's saloons. By midnight, the number had grown to 12. Each telling made Thomas's feat more impossible, more legendary. Some said he'd shot so fast his gun never left its holster. Others claimed he'd hit the same bullet hole 6 times. Thomas ignored the stories, working his forge as always. But the shop had changed. People entered differently now, cautiously, reverently, as if stepping into a church built to the god. Of gunsmoke and lead, never seen shooting like that, Sheriff Mills said, settling into the chair he'd taken to keeping by Thomas's workbench. 6 shots, 6 split barrels. Man could have killed them all instead. Killing's easy, Thomas replied, hammering a piece of glowing iron. Making them live with the fear, that's harder. More useful, too, the sheriff nodded slowly. Words spreading fast. 3 riders came through from Tucson this morning, just to see if the stories were true. One of them knew your name from before. Thomas's hammer struck harder. Jake Hawkins said he saw you in Dodge City back in '68. Something about a shooting competition. 7 men died that day. Thomas quenched the iron, steam rising like ghost's breath, over a silver cup and a fool's pride, nothing worth remembering. But others remembered. Throughout the day, more visitors arrived. Curious onlookers, old acquaintances, even a newspaper man from Phoenix. Thomas sent them all away with the same quiet firmness. Young Jimmy Porter hadn't left his post across the street since the shooting. His eyes followed Thomas's every move, studying, learning. "They say you're faster than lightning," he said when Thomas finally called him over. "Say you can shoot a man's gun without even aiming." "Speed's nothing without control," Thomas answered, showing the boy how to properly bank a forge. "Man who relies on speed alone dies quick. Remember that." Sarah Miller brought news from her father's store. "Raven Creek men were asking questions in Mesa City," she reported. "About you, about your past. They're offering gold for information." Thomas continued working, but his eyes hardened. They won't like what they learn. By afternoon, Rachel Turner hurried in, face flushed with worry. Riders spotted east of town, different ones. "Professional gunmen, by their look. Hired guns," Thomas confirmed. "Colonel's calling in favors, building his response. They say he's offered $5,000 to anyone who can outshoot you." Thomas tested the edge of a blade he was crafting. "Man's life is worth more than that." Doc Wilson arrived as the sun was setting, bringing whiskey and warnings. "3 more of the Colonel's crews hit farms out west," he said. "Taking hostages now, making examples." Thomas cleaned his tools with practiced care. "Trying to draw me out, force a confrontation on their terms." "Is it working?" The answer came. In the way Thomas checked his gun's action, the mechanical precision of a man preparing for war. Night brought more rumors. The Colonel had sent for specialists, famous gunmen with notorious reputations. Lightning Jack Haywood, the Collier brothers, even Black Marcus Kane, the fastest gun in New Mexico. Thomas received the news with the same quiet focus he brought to his forge work. Each name added to the list was like a hammer strike, shaping the coming conflict. Sheriff Mills returned after midnight, looking grim. It got word from the marshal in Tucson. Colonel's gathering his forces, over 50 men now, all hardened killers. This isn't just about redemption anymore. He's making it personal. "Already was personal," Thomas replied, checking the loads in his backup guns. He just didn't know it yet. In the deep night, Thomas stood at his forge, the fire casting long shadows. Each hammer blow rang like a church bell, calling men to judgment. The iron he shaped wasn't for plowshares anymore. These were different tools, for a different kind of work. Rachel found him there at dawn, still working. She watched him test a newly forged gun sight, appreciated how his hands moved with both strength and delicacy. "They say this shop will run red soon," she said softly. "That you're calling down thunder on all our heads." Thomas held the sight up to the morning light. "Thunder's already here, Miss Turner. Been building a long time. Now we just wait to see who survives the storm." Outside, the sun rose on a changed town. Redemption had woken to find itself the center of a gathering whirlwind with a legend at its heart. And legends once awakened had a way of demanding blood. U.S. Marshal James Walker arrived without fanfare, dust-covered and iron-eyed. He tied his horse outside Thomas's shop, just as the blacksmith was pulling a red-hot blade from the forge. "Been a long time, Iron Hand," Walker said, removing his hat. 15 years by my count. Not since that business in Santa Fe." Thomas didn't look up from his work. 17, the Hernandez brothers. 9 men dead in 8 seconds. Walker watched Thomas shape the glowing metal. "Still haven't seen shooting like that since." "That why you're here? Chasing old ghosts?" Walker pulled a worn tin star from his coat. "Got 12 deputies scattered. Across 3 territories. Good men, trained men. Lost 4 of them to the Colonel's gang last month." The hammer's rhythm never faltered. "Sorry to hear it. Territory's changing, Thomas. Men like the Colonel, they're not just outlaws anymore. They're building empires, need empire breakers to stop them." Thomas quenched the blade, steam rising. "Got a new life now?" "So I saw." Walker gestured at the split gun barrels mounted on the wall, trophies from yesterday's demonstration. 6 shots, 6 split barrels, still the best I've ever seen. Jimmy Porter burst in, out of breath. "Mr. McCullough!" Riders coming in from the east. Lot of them. Thomas and Walker moved to the window. 20 men approached, riding in formation. Not the colonel's usual raiders. These were professionals. Matched horses, military saddles, Winchester rifles. In scabbards. Reynolds's Rangers, Walker identified them. Ex-cavalry turned hired guns. Colonels not playing anymore. Thomas studied their approach. Taking positions around town. Cutting off escape routes. Smart. Professional. Walker checked. His own weapon. They won't rush in. They'll establish control first, squeeze tight until something breaks. Throughout the day, more riders arrived. Small groups, all professional, all taking strategic positions. The colonel was building his net carefully, drawing it closed around. Redemption, Sheriff Mills called an emergency town meeting. The saloon filled with frightened faces as Walker laid out the situation. Colonel's gathered over 70 men now, the marshal reported. Best gun hands money can buy. They're not just here to raid, they're here to conquer. To make an example, Thomas stood at the back, silent but watching. Rachel Turner found him there. "They say you once held off 30 men at Crystal Creek," she said softly, "that you can't be killed by normal bullets." "Stories grow with time," Thomas replied. "Truth's usually simpler, usually bloodier." Walker continued his briefing, but his eyes kept finding Thomas. Both men knew what was coming. The colonel wasn't just attacking a town, he was challenging a legend. By sunset, Redemption had become an armed camp. Reynolds' men patrolled the streets openly now, making their presence known, showing the town its new reality. Doc Wilson tended his small arsenal as darkness fell. "Counting at least 90 men out there now," he reported. "More coming. Towns surrounded." Thomas worked late into the night, his forge burning bright. The items he crafted weren't tools anymore. They were preparations, extra sights for his guns, reinforced door hinges, small, deadly things. Sarah Miller slipped in near midnight, carrying news. "The colonel's offering terms," she whispered. "Town surrenders, accepts his rule, hands you over, he'll spare everyone else." "They always offer terms," Thomas replied, checking the balance of a modified trigger. "Makes them feel civilized about the killing to come." Walker returned as the moon rose. "Got word from Tucson. No reinforcements coming. Territory's too big, too many fires burning. We're alone." Thomas nodded, unsurprised. "Usually are. These aren't common bandits, Thomas. These are trained killers, professionals. 90 men against one legend. Numbers don't matter much," Thomas said quietly. "Never did. Man can only die once. Question is what he dies for." In the distance, signal fires burned on the hills. The colonel's men were communicating, coordinating, building their cage around Redemption, one post at a time. Young Jimmy watched them from Thomas's doorway. "What happens now, Mr. McCullough?" Thomas checked his guns one final time, each motion precise as a prayer. "Now, boy, you're going to see why some legends don't die. They just wait for the right moment to remind folks why they became legends. In the first place, the night deepened, pregnant with violence. Tomorrow would bring blood. Everyone knew it. The only question was how much and whose. Lightning Jack Haywood made his move at dawn. The notorious gunman swaggered down Redemption's main street, spurs jingling a death song. Behind him, Reynolds's men watched from strategic positions, rifles ready. Thomas stood in his shop's doorway, seemingly absorbed in his morning routine. But those who knew him saw the subtle signs, the way his right hand hung loose, how his eyes tracked every movement on the street. "Iron Hand McCullough!" Haywood called out, stopping 30 paces away. "Heard you was fast. Heard you was magic with a gun. Time to see if the stories are true." Thomas didn't look up from sweeping his doorway. "Shop's closed, mister. Come back tomorrow." $5,000 to the man who kills you. That's what the colonel's offering. Haywood's hand hovered near, his pearl-handled Colt. "I aim to collect. Better men have tried." Thomas's voice carried quietly in the morning stillness. "They're all in Boot Hill now. Those men weren't Lightning Jack Haywood. Fastest gun in—" The shot came so quickly nobody saw Thomas draw. Haywood's gun belt fell to the ground, its holster split cleanly in two. His prize Colt clattered in the dust, unfired. "Next one goes through you," Thomas said calmly. "Your choice." Haywood stood frozen, face white. His reputation, built over years of gunfights, had just been shattered in a single second. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. Reynolds's men shifted uncomfortably, rifles suddenly feeling inadequate. The Collier brothers tried next, thinking to overwhelm Thomas with numbers. They attacked from opposite ends of the street, moving with the coordination of men who'd killed together for years. 2 shots rang out. 2 guns went spinning. The brothers stood disarmed, their shooting hands bleeding from precise wounds that had touched no bone. "Walk away," Thomas advised them, "while you still can." By noon, word had spread. 3 of the West's deadliest gunmen, humiliated without a single death. Marshal Walker watched it all from the sheriff's office, shaking his head in wonder. "Never seen anything like it," he told Mills. "Man's not just fast, he's impossible." But Thomas knew the real battle hadn't even started. These were just the opening moves, the colonel testing his defenses. The serious attack would come later. It started at dusk. Black Marcus Kane led 20 riders in a coordinated strike at the shop. They came from 3 directions, using buildings for cover, moving with military precision. Thomas met them with a display of gunfighting that would be talked about for decades. His first shot split Kane's rifle barrel as the man raised it. His second disarmed Kane's lieutenant. The next 6 shots created a barrier of ricochets that forced the attackers into a deadly crossfire of their own making. "Like watching a force of nature," Rachel Turner would later write in her diary. "He didn't just outshoot them, he outthought them. Every bullet seemed to have a purpose, every shot part of a larger plan. When it was over, 8 men lay wounded, none dead, but each precisely disabled. The rest fled, leaving behind a collection of ruined weapons and shattered reputations." Thomas walked among the wounded, checking each man's injuries. "Tell the colonel," he said quietly, "that next time won't be so gentle. Next time I start shooting to kill." Marshal Walker approached through the gun smoke. "That was the finest display of gun work I've ever seen, but you know it won't end here." "No," Thomas agreed, reloading his Colt with practiced ease. "Colonel's got his proof now. Knows the stories were true. Means he'll come in force next time. No more testing, no more probing attacks. Whole town's watching," Walker observed, "seeing the legend come to life." Indeed, people were emerging from buildings, staring at Thomas with a mixture of awe and fear. They'd heard the stories of Iron Hand, McCullough. Now they'd seen the reality. Jimmy Porter helped Thomas collect the ruined weapons, a grim trophy collection that proved legends sometimes fell short of reality. "You could have killed them all," the boy said. "Why didn't you?" Thomas checked, each disabled gun with professional interest. "Dead men don't carry warnings, boy. Living men running scared, they tell better stories. Stories that make other men think twice." But as night fell over Redemption, everyone knew the real violence was still coming. The colonel had lost some of his best men today, seen his hired guns humiliated. His response would be brutal. Thomas worked late at his forge, the rhythmic striking of his hammer sounding like distant thunder, each blow shaped not just iron, but destiny. The legend of Iron Hand McCullough had been reborn today in gunsmoke and lead. Tomorrow would prove if the legend was enough to save a town. The colonel's response came at midnight, not with guns or men, but with fire. 3 buildings on Redemption's outskirts burst into flames simultaneously, homes belonging to people who'd shown Thomas kindness. The message was clear. Legends might be bulletproof, but those around them weren't. Thomas stood in his darkened shop, watching the flames paint the sky crimson. Marshal Walker found him there, both men understanding what this escalation meant. Sarah Miller's family was in one of those houses, Walker reported grimly. They got out, but barely. Lost everything. Thomas's hand tightened on his gun belt. Colonels changing the rules, making it personal. Testing your conscience, not your aim. Throughout the night, more messages arrived. Riders dropped off items. At the shop's door, a schoolbook belonging to Jimmy Porter's sister, a locket from Rachel Turner's house, Doc Wilson's spare medical bag. Each item a reminder that the colonel could reach anyone, anywhere. Dawn brought Sarah Miller herself, face streaked with soot but eyes hard as flint. They took everything, she said quietly, but they left this. She handed Thomas a note, surrender by sunset or next time we don't wake them first. Thomas read it twice, then fed it to his forge. The flames turned the paper to ash, but the threat remained, heavy as lead in the air. You should leave town, he told her. All of you should, while you can. Running's not the answer. Her voice held steel. Pa says you once faced down 30 men to protect a family you didn't even know. Said it wasn't about the odds, it was about what's right. The morning brought more news, each report worse than the last. The colonel's men had raided 3 outlying farms, taking hostages. They'd blocked the water supply to the south side of town. Supplies couldn't get through. The noose was tightening. Rachel Turner arrived as Thomas was checking his guns. They sabotaged the school, she reported. Broke everything they could find. Left another message. Children don't need education in a ghost town. Thomas's response was to continue his preparations, but those who knew him saw the war in his eyes. Each act of destruction, each threat against innocence, stripped away more of his carefully maintained peace. You're still trying not to kill, Marshal Walker observed, watching Thomas practice. Even now, even after everything they've done, man starts killing hard to stop. Thomas's voice was distant, remembering. Becomes too easy, too natural. Sometimes killing's necessary. Always is. That's the problem. By noon, the colonel's strategy became clear. His men weren't just attacking the town. They were attacking Thomas's conscience. Every person he'd helped, every kindness he'd shown, became a vulnerability to be exploited. Doc Wilson brought word from his rounds. People are scared, Thomas. Not just of dying, of living through what's coming. Colonel's men, they're not just threatening violence, they're promising it slow, personal. The afternoon brought more fires, more threats. Jimmy Porter's father took a beating for refusing to post a bounty on Thomas's head. Rachel's house was ransacked, her personal letters scattered through town like leaves. They're trying to turn the town against you, Walker said, watching Thomas. Work his forge. Make them blame you for what's happening. Already do, Thomas replied, as they should. But when Sarah Miller organized volunteers to help rebuild burned homes, more people showed up than expected. When Rachel Turner reopened the school in her own home, every student attended. The town was scared, but not broken. Night fell heavy with tension. Thomas stood at his forge, hammering iron that glowed like captured sunset. Each strike rang with certainty, with the weight of decision. You've decided something, Walker observed. Peace was a dream, Thomas said quietly. Good dream. Lasted longer than I deserved. But dreams end. He lifted his legendary Colt, studying how the firelight played on its worn surface. Colonel wants Iron Hand McCullough. Fine. Time to show him why that name used to make killers wake up screaming. Outside, more fires bloomed in the darkness, more messages written in flame and fear. But something had changed. The colonel had wanted to break a legend by breaking those around him. Instead, he'd awakened something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose, and skills that had once made him death's own shadow. The price of peace had been paid in full. Now came the cost of war. Marshal Walker found Thomas writing letters at midnight, his practiced hand addressing envelopes to names that made the lawman's eyes widen. John Quicksilver Martinez, Samuel Three-Gun Thompson, the Hawkins brothers? Walker read the names, with growing disbelief. These men are legends themselves. Their debts, Thomas replied, sealing another envelope. Time to collect. How many? Enough. Thomas checked his ledger. Saved Martinez from a Mexican firing squad in '66. Helped Thompson escape the Yuma prison massacre. Hawkins boys owe me for their sister's life. Jimmy Porter volunteered to ride out with the letters, but Thomas shook his head. Too dangerous, boy. Colonel's men are watching every trail. Then how a shadow detached itself from the darkened shop corner. A Native American man, dressed in cavalry scout clothing, moved silently into the lamplight. Running Horse, Thomas nodded, still quiet as death. Still alive, thanks to Crystal Creek. The scout gathered the letters. These will reach their targets. 2 days, maybe 3. After he disappeared into the night, Walker whistled softly. That's Running Horse? The Army's best scout. Best there ever was, Thomas confirmed. Man can track a fish through water. Dawn brought the first response. 2 riders approached from the east, moving like shadows through the colonel's picket lines. The Hawkins brothers, Jake and Samuel, had ridden through the night to answer Thomas's. A call? Heard you needed some gun hands, Jake said simply. Both men carried custom rifles and showed the easy confidence of professional manhunters. By noon, John Martinez arrived, his Mexican spurs announcing his presence. The famous bounty hunter's face bore new scars, but his gun hand remained steady as stone. Mi hermano, he greeted Thomas. The letters spoke of trouble. Worse than that, Thomas replied. War's coming. Martinez's smile was sharp as a knife. Good. Peace was getting boring. Sarah Miller watched the arrivals from her temporary shelter, counting weapons and reputations. These men, she asked Thomas, they're like you. No. His voice was quiet. They're good. Very good. But there's a reason they all owe me debts. Throughout the day, more legends rode in. Three-Gun Thompson arrived leading a string of spare horses, each laden with weapons. The Reeves sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, brought their famous long rifles and years of frontier experience. Even Doc Wilson contributed, revealing a cache of military-grade medical supplies he'd been saving. Army surgeon for 20 years, he explained. Figured these might be needed someday. Rachel Turner converted her home into a planning center, mapping the colonel's positions with the precision of a military strategist. Father was a general, she said when Thomas raised an eyebrow. Taught me more than just school books. The colonel's men watched all this activity with growing unease. Their probing attacks were met with professional resistance now. 3 raiders tried to burn the livery stable. All 3 were wounded by precise rifle fire from unseen positions. Towns changing, Walker observed, watching Thomas organize his growing force. Becoming a fortress, becoming what it needs to be, Thomas corrected. War's got its own rules. Colonel wanted to play soldier. He's about to learn what that really means. By evening, Running Horse returned with more responses. 5 more. Legends were coming, each with their own stories, their own debts to Iron Hand McCullough. You saved all these people? Jimmy asked, watching Thomas clean his guns. No. Thomas checked his sights with practiced care. Just gave them a chance when they needed one. Same thing this town did for me. Night fell over a transformed redemption. Defensive positions had been established, ammunition distributed. Professional gunmen patrolled the streets where yesterday there had been only frightened townspeople. Sarah found Thomas at his forge, crafting something small and precise. They say you're building an army, she said. No. He held up his work, a modified gun sight, deadly in its accuracy. Building justice. Colonel wants to know why they called me Iron Hand? He's about to find out. In the distance, signal fires showed the colonel's forces were also growing. More hired guns, more killers drawn by the promise of fame and money. But Thomas worked his forge with the same steady rhythm, each strike ringing like a death knell. He wasn't just gathering allies, he was forging a weapon, one made of legends and debts, of skill and desperate courage. The colonel had tried to break a town by threatening its people. Instead, he'd given them a reason to become something stronger, something that would remind him why some legends were written in blood and bullet holes, and why Iron Hand McCullough's legend was the darkest of them all. Running Horse's report came at dawn, delivered in the shadowed corner of Thomas's shop. 120 men now, more coming. Professional soldiers, not common bandits, using military formations, proper picket lines. Thomas worked his forge while listening. The colonel himself arrived last night, brought 20 more men with him. Elite unit, all wearing cavalry uniforms without insignia. Marshal Walker cursed softly. Deserters from the 7th Cavalry. Heard rumors some of their best had gone bad, turned mercenary. Through the morning more reports filtered in. The Hawkins brothers spotted artillery being moved into position. 3 Civil War cannons, professionally crewed. Martinez's scouts identified sniper positions being established on the surrounding ridges. This isn't just an outlaw gang anymore, Walker observed, watching Thomas check his weapons. Colonel's building a proper army, always was his plan. Thomas's voice was calm as he loaded spare cylinders. Take the territory piece by piece, build a private empire. We just forced his hand, made him show his true strength too soon. Sarah Miller brought news from her father's store. Traders say he's offering triple wages to any gunman who joins him, getting responses from as far as Dakota territory. Greed's a powerful recruiter, Thomas replied, but his eyes held cold calculation. Each report added detail to the picture forming in his mind. The tactics the colonel would use, the strategies he'd employ. By noon, the colonel's army had established a proper siege line, professional fortifications, interlocking fields of fire, ammunition dumps placed with military precision. 3-gun Thompson watched it all through his spyglass, impressed despite himself. Man knows his business, he admitted. Setting up like the siege of Vicksburg means he's planning something big, Thomas agreed. Something decisive. Rachel Turner's house had become their tactical headquarters, her schoolroom maps repurposed to show enemy positions. Red pins marked confirmed threats, blue showed defensive positions. The picture they painted was grim. They're targeting the water supply first, Rachel explained, her father's military training showing. Then the food stores. Classic siege tactics. Jimmy Porter slipped through enemy lines with remarkable skill, bringing back detailed reports. They've got Gatling guns, he reported, eyes wide. 3 of them. And some kind of new repeating rifles. I ain't seen before. Thomas studied the weapons through his spyglass. Winchester 1876 models, not even on the market yet. Military prototypes. His expression hardened. Colonel's got friends in high places. The afternoon brought more complications. Riders arrived from nearby towns, but not to help, to warn. The colonel's influence spread further than anyone had guessed. Local officials had been bought, territorial authorities threatened. No help would come from outside. We're alone, Walker said simply. Always were, Thomas replied, checking the modification he'd made to his rifle's sight. Changes nothing. As evening approached, the colonel made his first official communication. A rider under white flag delivered his terms. Surrender Thomas. And his legendary allies, or he'd reduce redemption to ash. Says he'll accept our surrender until midnight, Walker reported. After that, no mercy. Thomas watched the sun setting behind the colonel's siege lines. Artillery pieces were being zeroed in, their crews working with professional efficiency. Snipers adjusted their positions for night firing. The trap was almost ready. He's got 10. Times our numbers, Martinez observed. Professional soldiers, heavy weapons, unlimited ammunition. Numbers aren't everything, Thomas replied, but his eyes never stopped tracking enemy movements. Quality matters more than quantity. Even quality has limits, Walker warned. Man can't fight an army alone. Not alone. Thomas turned to where his gathered allies waited. Legends in their own right, each one deadly, each one proven. But together we're not just fighters, we're a reminder. Of what? Of why they tell stories about us. Why men whisper our names in saloons. Why mothers scare their children with tales of Iron Hand McCullough and the legends who ride with him. Night fell over Redemption like a funeral shroud. The colonel's campfires burned in a great circle around the town, each flame marking a piece of his army. The sight should have been terrifying, overwhelming force poised to destroy one small town. But in his shop, Thomas worked his forge with the same steady rhythm. Each strike of his hammer matched the beat of distant drums from the colonel's camp. Two forces preparing for war, one massive and obvious, the other small but deadly. Come midnight, he told his gathered allies, the colonel's going to learn something about legends, about why some stories don't die, why some men can't be beaten by mere numbers. In the distance, thunder rolled across the desert, or perhaps it was artillery being positioned. Either way, the sound carried the promise of violence to come. The storm was gathering, and like all storms, it would break with lightning and thunder. With death and legend, Iron Hand McCullough's legend was about to grow darker still. The colonel's second message arrived with the midnight hour, carried by an old man Thomas hadn't seen in 20 years. Matthew Hayes, his father's former deputy, now wore the colonel's colors. He said you'd remember this, Hayes said quietly, placing a battered tin star on Thomas's workbench. The badge was split by a bullet hole, its silver surface stained dark with old blood. Thomas stared at the star, his face suddenly ashen. Where did he get this? Took it off your father's body, Hayes replied. That night in Silver City, the night you weren't there. The shop fell silent. Even the forge's flames seemed to dim as Thomas picked up the star, his fingers tracing the bullet hole with terrible familiarity. The colonel, Thomas said softly, is William McCullough, my brother. Marshal Walker's curse cut through the silence. Your brother? The one who killed our father, yes. Thomas's voice carried the weight of decades. Night I was chasing bounties in Mexico, night I should have been home. The gathered legends exchanged glances. They'd all heard fragments of the story, how Iron Hand McCullough's father, Sheriff James McCullough, had died defending Silver City from raiders, but none had known the full truth. William was always the proper one, Thomas continued, still, holding the star. Career military man, West Point graduate, perfect son, until the war broke him, turned him into something else, something cruel. Hayes nodded slowly. Your father discovered he was running weapons to raiders, confronted him. About it, William shot him down in his own office, and now he's here. Walker's voice was grim. 20 years later, why? Because of what happened after. Thomas's eyes never left the star. I hunted him, tracked him through 4 territories, nearly killed him in Dodge City. He spent 20 years building power, gathering forces, all to face me again. Sarah Miller's voice came from the doorway. That's why he targeted the town, not for territory, for revenge. Revenge, power, family legacy. Thomas finally set the star down. William always thought he deserved to inherit father's authority. Now he's built his own kind of law. The news spread through Redemption like wildfire. The defenders gathered in Rachel's makeshift headquarters, studying maps with new understanding. Changes the tactical situation, Martinez observed. Man fighting for revenge doesn't think like one fighting for profit. Makes him more dangerous. 3-gun Thompson added, more ruthless. Thomas worked his forge through the night, but his rhythms were different now. Each hammer strike carried the weight of memory, of family bonds twisted by violence. Jimmy Porter found him there at dawn. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone about him being your brother?" "Some stories are too heavy to carry," Thomas replied. "Some debts can only be paid in blood." The colonel's army grew restless as sunrise approached. Their campfires burned lower, replaced by the metallic sounds of weapons being checked and loaded. "He'll attack at dawn," Thomas told his gathered allies. "William always preferred morning attacks, said a man should see death coming." "Town's still ready to stand with you," Rachel reported. "Knowing the truth, it hasn't changed their loyalty." "Should," Thomas said quietly. "I brought this on them. My family's war." "No." Sarah Miller's voice was firm. "You gave this town 10 years of protection, of peace. We're not standing with you because we have to. We're standing with you because you stood with us." The first light of dawn revealed the colonel's army forming into attack positions. At their head rode a figure in a pristine cavalry uniform. William McCullough himself, come to end a 20-year vendetta. "You were wrong about one thing," Walker told Thomas as they watched the enemy preparations. "This isn't just about family anymore. It's about two kinds of law, two kinds of justice. The kind your father believed in, and the kind your brother corrupted." Thomas checked his guns one final time, each motion carrying the weight of destiny. The brother who destroyed their family was coming to finish what he'd started in Silver City. But this time, Iron Hand McCullough wasn't chasing bounties in Mexico. This time, he was standing with legends at his back and righteousness in his heart. The day of reckoning had dawned, and blood, as always, would answer blood. Thomas worked his forge one final time as dawn approached, each hammer strike ringing like a church bell. The items he crafted weren't tools of peace anymore. They were instruments of war. Modified gun sights, reinforced firing positions, deadly little innovations born from decades of survival. "Building coffin nails," Martinez observed, watching from the doorway. "Building justice," Thomas corrected, his hands never stopping. William always understood force, never understood precision. Around them, redemption transformed into a fortress. The Hawkins brothers established sniper positions in the church tower, their rifles zeroed for every approach. Three-gun Thompson converted the saloon into a hardened strongpoint, complete with firing ports and ammunition caches. "Your brother's men are moving," Running Horse reported, appearing like a shadow. "Artillery shifting to final positions, cavalry units forming." "On the flanks," Thomas nodded, unsurprised. "William's using Union Army tactics. Gonna try to break us with cannon fire, then send in mounted troops to exploit the gaps." Rachel Turner's schoolhouse headquarters had become a command center. Her maps showed every defensive position, every line of fire, every fallback point. "We've got interlocking fields of coverage," she explained. "No blind spots." "Won't matter once the cannons open up," Walker warned. "Might surprise you," Thomas replied, checking a modified rifle sight. William always did underestimate what a craftsman can do. Jimmy Porter proved his worth again, slipping through enemy lines to report their preparations. "They're loading the Gatling guns," he said. "And the colonel, he's wearing all his medals, like it's a formal military operation." Always was vain about his achievements, Thomas commented, but his eyes held cold calculation. Each report added to his understanding of what was coming. Sarah Miller organized the townspeople, turning shopkeepers and farmers into a supply line. Ammunition, water, medical supplies, everything positioned for quick access. "We're ready," she reported, "whatever comes." "Gonna get bad," Thomas warned her. "William won't stop until one of us is dead. Then make sure it's him." Her voice held steel. "Some brothers don't deserve the name." As noon approached, Thomas gathered his legends for final instructions. Each one had fought beside him before. Each owed him their life. Now they'd help him face his greatest battle. "William's got numbers," he told them. Got artillery, got professional soldiers, but he's forgotten something important. What's that? Martinez asked. Legends aren't made by numbers. They're made by will, by skill, by the kind of precision that splits gun barrels and changes history. The Colonel's army had grown quiet, the calm before the storm. Through his spyglass, Thomas watched his brother reviewing the troops. William rode a white horse, his uniform immaculate, every inch the professional soldier. He's everything I'm not, Thomas told Walker, military-trained, properly educated, born to command. And that's why he'll lose. How you figure? Because he thinks this is a military operation, thinks enough force can solve any problem. Thomas checked his Colt one final time. But some problems need a craftsman's touch, need the kind of precision you learn at a forge, not at West Point. The town held its breath as afternoon shadows lengthened. Thomas's legends took their positions. Martinez with his lightning-fast revolvers, the Hawkins brothers with their sniper rifles, Thompson with his 3 guns ready. In his shop, Thomas made his final preparations. Each gun cleaned and loaded, each sight adjusted, each movement practiced until it was perfect as a prayer. Your brother's got 10 times our numbers, Walker reminded him. Numbers don't matter much in legend-making, Thomas replied. Never did. Man can only die once. Trick is making that death mean something. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Soon, William would begin his attack. Soon, 20 years of hatred would end in gun smoke and blood. Thomas stood at his forge one last time, watching the flames dance. He'd spent 10 years trying to forget what he was, trying to be just a craftsman. But some crafts dealt in lead and legend, in justice and retribution. Iron Hand McCullough's legend had been born in violence. Now it would end there, one way or another. The forge fires died slowly like the sun setting on an era. Tomorrow, redemption would either be free or it would be ashes, and 2 brothers, separated by death and duty, would finally settle their father's legacy. The Colonel's cannons opened fire at sunset, their shells arcing high over redemption like angry stars. But Thomas had spent 10 years preparing his shop for just such an attack. The reinforced walls, angled to deflect impacts, held firm. Time. Thomas ordered Martinez, who watched with a pocket watch. 45 seconds between salvos, Martinez reported. Professional artillery crews. They're walking the shots in. Thomas nodded, counting under his breath. When the next barrage came, he was ready. A single shot from his modified rifle struck the lead cannon's powder cache. The explosion lit up the evening sky, sending the Colonel's artillerymen scattering. Impossible. Shot, Walker breathed. No. Thomas reloaded with mechanical precision, just good craftsmanship. Sights modified for extreme range. The Colonel's response was immediate. Cavalry units charged from 3 directions, Gatling guns providing covering fire. But Thomas had prepared for this too. Buried charges, triggered by tripwires, through horses and riders into chaos. Your brother's losing his tactical advantage, Martinez observed. William always did let anger cloud his judgment. Thomas's voice was cold as he picked off Gatling gunners with surgical precision, probably why he never made general. The Hawkins brothers proved their worth from the church tower, their long rifles dropping officers with methodical efficiency. 3-gun Thompson's fortified saloon became a death trap for any raiders who got too close. Colonel's shifting his forces, Running Horse reported, materializing from the shadows. Main attack coming from the east now. Thomas dispatched orders through his network of defenders. Each position had been carefully planned, each fallback point precisely calculated. This wasn't just combat. It was craftsmanship applied to warfare. The Colonel's voice carried across the battlefield, amplified by rage. You can't hide forever, little brother. Not this time. Thomas's response was another perfect shot, splitting William's sword in half as he raised it to signal another charge. Never was good at hiding, he called back, just better at aiming. The aiguilles. Battle transformed Redemption's streets into a killing ground. The colonel's men, for all their training, found themselves caught in deadly crossfires. Every approach had been pre-sighted, every angle covered. "They're bringing up the reserve forces," Jimmy Porter reported from his observation post. "At least 60 men moving in combat formation." Sarah Miller's supply line proved its worth, keeping defenders stocked with ammunition and water. Rachel Turner coordinated movements from her headquarters, reading the battle like one of her schoolbooks. "Your brother's getting desperate," Walker observed as another attack faltered. "He's losing too many men." "William never did know when to quit," Thomas replied, but his eyes tracked movement in the growing darkness. "He's got one more play coming. Something big." The prediction proved true moments later. The colonel launched a massive assault, committing all his remaining forces. Cavalry charged from multiple directions, while infantry advanced under covering fire from the surviving Gatling. "Guns! He's trying to overwhelm us with numbers," Martinez shouted over the gunfire. "No," Thomas's voice was grimly certain. "He's providing a distraction. Watch the shadows." Even as he spoke, elite troops began emerging from hiding places throughout town, men who'd infiltrated during the day, waiting for this moment. The colonel's best killers, positioning themselves to strike at the defenders' backs. But Thomas had anticipated this too. Each hidden enemy found themselves targeted by pre-positioned defenders. The night erupted in close-quarter combat as years of planning met military precision. "Your brother's losing his army," Walker reported, counting the fallen. "He's losing." "More than that," Thomas replied, watching William's distant figure. "He's losing his legend, everything he spent 20 years building." The colonel's fury was visible even at a distance. His perfect military operation was being dismantled by a craftsman's precision, his soldiers outmaneuvered by a blacksmith's planning. "Time to end this," Thomas said quietly, checking his legendary Colt, "before he throws away what's left of his army." The sun's last light painted Redemption's streets red as blood. The colonel's massive force had been reduced to scattered groups, their coordination shattered, their professional discipline broken by Thomas's precise defense. But William McCullough hadn't spent 20 years planning this moment to be defeated so easily. As darkness fell, he played his final card, one that would force his brother to face him man to man, legend to legend. The time for tactics was ending. The time for blood was about to begin. The colonel's final card turned out to be fire. Not random destruction, but precise military incendiary shells, targeting Thomas's carefully prepared positions. The night sky turned orange as defensive posts began to burn, fall back to secondary. "Positions," Thomas ordered, his voice carrying over the chaos, but his eyes never left his brother's distant figure. William sat his white horse like a statue, watching his work burn. "You always did like breaking things," Thomas called out, his voice cutting through the roar of flames. "Never could build worth a damn." The colonel's response was cold and precise, as his military bearing. "I built an army, little brother, built an empire. What did you build, a shop, some tools?" He spurred his horse forward into the firelight. Time to finish what started in Silver City. Thomas checked his guns with methodical care. "Been 20 years since you murdered our father. Long time to carry that weight." "Father was a fool," William's voice cracked with old rage. "Trying to enforce his small-town justice against the future, just like you with your craftsman's principles. World's changing, brother. Men like us, we either change it or we die." The defensive line was collapsing. Fire drove defenders from their positions, while the colonel's remaining forces pressed their advantage. But Thomas had planned for this. "Two, Martinez," he called out, "spring the trap." Hidden water barrels, positioned days ago, burst open from precise rifle fire. The flooding created channels, directing the flames exactly where Thomas wanted them, into the paths of the attacking forces. "You were always clever," William acknowledged, watching his men scramble away from sudden fire barriers. "But clever. isn't enough. Not against proper military force. Proper? Thomas's laugh was harsh as gunfire. Was it proper when you shot our father in the back, when you took his star as a trophy? The colonel's composure cracked slightly. I offered him a place in the new order, same as I'm offering you now. Join me, brother. Together we could rule these territories. Rather work iron than steal it. Thomas moved into the open, away from cover. Rather build than destroy. Around them, the battle shifted. The colonel's remaining men tried to maneuver through the maze of fire Thomas had created. But each path led them into prepared killing zones, where legends waited with loaded guns. Your choice then. William drew his pistol with military precision. Die like father did, defending a world that's already dead. Thomas's draw was invisible to the human eye. His gun seemed to materialize in his hand, as if summoned by sorcery. World ain't dead, William, just changing. Question is, what are we changing it into? The brothers faced each other across 30 paces of firelit street. Two legends, two visions of justice, two sides of the same blood-stained coin. You could have been more than this. William's voice carried genuine regret. Could have been a general, a leader of men. Instead, you chose to be a craftsman. Chose to build instead of break. Thomas's gun didn't waver. Chose to make things better instead of just making them bend. The colonel's first shot was textbook. Perfect. But Thomas had anticipated the exact angle, the precise moment. His return fire split William's bullet in mid-air, a feat that would have seemed impossible if a dozen witnesses hadn't seen it. Impossible. William's composure shattered completely. No one can... Craftsman's secret, Thomas interrupted, his voice cold as forged steel. Anything's possible with enough practice, enough precision. The night erupted in gunfire as both brothers demonstrated why they were legends. William's military training produced a storm of tactically perfect shots. Thomas's craftsman's precision turned each bullet aside, splitting them, deflecting them, turning his brother's strength against him. Die! William's cry was primal as he emptied his guns. Just die! But Thomas moved like smoke through the bullets, each step calculated, each shot precise. This wasn't just combat, it was craftsmanship applied to violence, skill honed to supernatural levels. 20 years you spent building an army. Thomas's voice carried over the gunfire. 20 years I spent building something else, building justice, building legend. The colonel's guns ran dry. He stood exposed in the firelight, his perfect uniform now torn and smoking. What are you? He whispered. Thomas's answer came in the form of a single perfect shot. Thomas's bullet struck with surgical precision, splitting the colonel's gun belt buckle. William's remaining weapons clattered to the ground, leaving him defenseless before his younger brother. Do it! William snarled, blood seeping from where the buckle's fragments had cut him. Finish what you started in Dodge City, but Thomas's gun didn't fire. That's the difference between us, William. Always was. You see a man defenseless, you shoot him in the back, like you did father. Around them the battle was ending. The colonel's remaining forces, seeing their leader disarmed, began throwing down their weapons. The legends Thomas had gathered moved. With professional efficiency, disarming and securing prisoners. You're weak, William spat, just like father was weak. World's changing, brother. No place for craftsmen and their precious principles. Thomas holstered his gun with deliberate care. World's always changing. Question is whether we make it better or worse. He approached his brother slowly. You wanted to know what I've been. Building these 20 years, building justice, building a legend that stands for something more than just killing. And what's that worth? William's laugh was bitter as gunsmoke. Can't stop progress with a blacksmith's hammer. No. Thomas agreed. But you can shape it, guide it, make something better than what was there before. The sun was rising now. painting redemption's scarred streets in shades of gold and crimson. The fires were dying, revealing the cost of the night's battle. The colonel's mighty army lay broken, not by superior force, but by precise planning and careful craft. "Look around you, William." Thomas gestured at the town. "You brought an army, brought artillery, Gatling guns, professional soldiers, and you lost to a blacksmith and his friends. Know why?" The colonel's face twisted with rage. Because I built something stronger than an army," Thomas interrupted. "Built trust, built loyalty, built the kind of legend that makes men stand together against empires." Marshal Walker approached, carrying irons. "It's over, Colonel. 20 years of empire building ended by a craftsman's precision." But William wasn't finished. With snake-like speed, he drew a hidden derringer from his sleeve. "Die like father died," he screamed, triggering the small gun. Thomas's response was another demonstration of impossible skill. His bullet struck the derringer's, a barrel splitting it lengthwise. The gun exploded in William's hand, leaving him truly defenseless at last. "Father died protecting justice," Thomas said quietly. "Died standing for something. What are you dying for, William? Empty dreams of power, memories of medals that don't mean anything anymore." The colonel sagged, 20 years of hatred draining away like blood from a mortal wound. "What happens now, little brother? Going to execute me like I executed him?" "No." Thomas drew their father's star from his pocket, the one William had kept as a trophy. "Going to do what father would have done. Going to let the law judge you." As Walker led the colonel away, Sarah Miller approached Thomas. "Town's damaged," she reported, "but we can rebuild it, make it stronger." "That's the thing about craftsmanship," Thomas replied, watching his brother being led away. "Always about building, about making things better bit by bit." The legends gathered one last time in Thomas's shop. Each had played their part, each had helped shape this victory. But they all knew the real legend wasn't about the fighting. "Man's reputation usually comes from what he destroys," Martinez observed, cleaning his guns. "You built yours different, hermano." "Had a good teacher," Thomas replied, thinking of his father. "Taught me that real strength isn't in breaking things. It's in making them right, making them last." As dawn painted the sky in colors of renewal, Thomas lit his forge one more time. The flames rose steady and strong, like justice itself. There would be work to do, rebuilding what the battle had damaged. But that was fine. After all, he was a craftsman. Building things was what he did best. The morning after the battle, Thomas returned to his forge, not to craft weapons or tools of war, but to begin the work of rebuilding. The rhythmic ring of his hammer called others back to life, reminding redemption that creation always follows. Destruction. 37 buildings damaged, Marshal Walker reported, watching Thomas shape a replacement hinge for the church door. 8 completely destroyed, but no civilian casualties. Your planning saw to that. "Town'll rebuild," Thomas replied, quenching the iron. "Always does. Question is what we build it into." The colonel's captured army provided labor for reconstruction. Their military precision now turned to repairing what they'd tried to destroy. William himself sat in a reinforced cell, watching through the window as his empire crumbled and a new order rose. "Your brother's being transferred to Yuma prison next week," Walker informed Thomas, "along with his senior officers. Territory judges calling it the biggest criminal case in a decade." Thomas tested the hinge's action. Justice comes in different forms, sometimes from a judge's gavel, sometimes from a craftsman's hammer. The legends prepared to depart, each carrying new stories to add to their own. Martinez paused at Thomas's door one last time. "Built yourself a different kind of legend, amigo, one that'll last longer than gunsmoke." Throughout the day, townspeople brought items for repair. Doors broken in the fighting, tools damaged by fire, pieces of their lives that needed mending. Thomas worked each piece with the same care he'd used to split gun barrels, seeing in each repair a small victory for creation over destruction. "You could have killed him," Sarah Miller said softly, watching him work. "Your brother. Everyone would have understood why." "Killing's easy," Thomas replied, carefully fitting a repaired latch. "Building something better, that's the real challenge." As sunset painted the sky, Thomas stood in his doorway, watching redemption come back to life. The town had changed, just as William had predicted, but it had changed into something stronger, something built on craftsmanship and justice rather than force and fear. The forge fires burned steady and true, promising tomorrow's work, tomorrow's building. Some legends were written in gun smoke and blood, but the best ones, Thomas knew, were forged in iron and hope. A month after the battle, they mounted the colonel's split gun belt above Thomas's forge, not as a trophy of violence, but as a reminder that precision could overcome force, that craftsmanship could defeat armies. Redemption had changed. Rebuilt, stronger, like iron reforged. The town became known not just for Iron Hand McCullough's stand, but for what came after, a place where justice and craftsmanship worked together, where legends were built rather than simply written in blood. "3 more smiths asked to apprentice with you," Rachel Turner reported one morning, watching Thomas teach Jimmy Porter the proper way to work steel. Word spread about the man who outshot an army with a craftsman's eye. "Teaching's harder than fighting," Thomas replied, guiding Jimmy's hammer technique, "but build something better." The split gun barrels still hung on his wall, but now they shared space with finely crafted tools and precisely made hardware. Each piece told part of the story, how accuracy could overcome violence, how building could defeat breaking. Marshal Walker brought news from the territory. Colonel's empires collapsed completely. His men either surrendered or reformed. "Seems you didn't just save the town, you changed the whole territory." "Territory was always changing," Thomas answered, working his forge. "Just helped shape it in a better direction." Young Jimmy proved an apt pupil, learning not just metalwork, but the principles behind it. "You're teaching me more than just smithing," he observed one day. "Teaching you what my father taught me," Thomas replied. "That real strength isn't in destruction, it's in building something that lasts." The legend of Iron Hand McCullough grew, but not as it had before. Now it was told in 2 parts, first of the deadly gunman who could split bullets and outshoot armies, then of the craftsman who chose to build rather than destroy, who forged justice with precision rather than force. Thomas kept their father's star, not displayed but close at hand, a reminder of the price of justice and the responsibility of legacy. The weight of it felt different now, not a burden of vengeance, but a commission to build something worthy of its meaning. In time, redemption became known as a place where things were made right. Both metal and justice worked with equal care. And if someone needed to be reminded why, they could visit a certain blacksmith shop where a craftsman's precision had once defeated an army and where new legends were still being forged, one careful hammer strike at a time.